The American Brain Tumor Association is pleased to welcome you back to our webinar series. Our webinar topic today is Advanced Care Planning. My name is Umbreen Maan, Program Manager here at the ABTA, and I'm delighted to introduce our speaker. Dr. Sheena Zapata is a palliative medicine physician specializing in treatments that focus on reducing pain and other symptoms, improving quality of life, and supporting patients and their families. She partners with patients to identify goals of care and collaborates with Miami Cancer Institute's multidisciplinary team of experts to deliver personalized, comprehensive care that may include medication, nutritional guidance, relaxation therapy, spiritual and emotional support, and other treatments. Dr. Zapata is also actively involved in research to improve palliative care practices and patient outcomes. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Zapata. You may now begin your presentation.
Thank you so much, Umbreen. Hello, everyone. My name is Sheena Mehta Zapata, and I'm a palliative medicine physician at Miami Cancer Institute, which is part of Baptist Health South Florida. I feel so privileged to be invited to speak with you all today about advanced care planning, and I'm really looking forward to hearing your experiences and answering your questions on this topic. So to begin, I have no financial or disclosures otherwise. Let's start with some objectives for today. So my hope today is that we're going to talk and understand the components of advanced care planning and its importance. We'll discuss the role of hospice and palliative care and the differences between the two. We'll learn about how to start important conversations with family and loved ones about end-of-life care and decision-making. And my hope is to give you guidance and advice on completing important documents such as healthcare proxies and advanced directives. So let's start with, what is advanced care planning? Well, it's a process whereby a person thinks about their values and their care preference. So their values and their healthcare preferences. And they consider the types of care that they would want and the kinds of care that they wouldn't want to receive in the future in different medical situations. And then importantly, discussing those preferences with their loved ones and their clinicians. So why think about it? Well, consider this. If you were in a sudden accident or became unwell from a serious illness and you weren't able to communicate your wishes or your preferences, who would you want to speak for you? What would you want them to say? And do they know what you want them to say? So advanced care planning is a relatively new concept. About 30 years ago, advocacy for this began, and a federal law was passed that actually required physicians to provide patients with information on this topic. But the focus at that time was really just about completing a document. Since then, we've taken a way more comprehensive approach, and we're stressing communication and conversations. Most patients feel like advanced care planning is important, but only a minority have actually had discussions with the doctor before. On surveys, about 90% of people feel like it's important to talk about end-of-life care wishes, but only about 30% of people actually have done so. About 95% of people feel like it's important to actually put their wishes on paper, but only about a quarter of people have done so and share it with their doctors. So my hope today is that this may motivate you and your loved ones to start the conversation with your families and with your healthcare providers. So planning your final days it's never easy, but it's an invaluable gift that you give to your loved ones. These discussions can be amongst the richest and the most intimate that friends and family share. And they're certainly some of the most meaningful and important conversations that I have with my patients and their families in the office. Why is it important? Well, it allows you to identify treatments that you'd want or you wouldn't want to receive. It gives you some sense of control over the future. There's so many aspects of cancer that we don't have control over, but this is something that you do. It ensures that you're cared for in a manner that's consistent with your preferences. And it gives you peace of mind that everyone else knows what you want as well. For loved ones, studies show that when there's a meaningful conversation about end-of-life care choices, survivors report less feelings of guilt, less depression, and have an easier time of processing the grieving. It also minimizes the need to make difficult decisions under stressful situations. Sitting around a kitchen table and talking about it is a lot easier than making decisions in the middle of a crisis in the intensive care unit. And for providers like myself, it allows us to create a plan that's consistent with our patients' wishes, and it enhances trust between patients and their providers. It is undoubtedly hard to talk about the kinds of medical treatments that you'd want or the kinds of treatments that you wouldn't want in certain situations if you've never been in those situations before or those things aren't happening to you right now. So before talking about your healthcare preferences, I think that it's better to start the conversation by reflecting on some of these themes. And that gives us the ability, and it helps us have a more informed conversation about advanced care planning later. So some things that I think are worth reflecting and exploring, whether it's with yourself or with a loved one, are goals, values, your belief system, understanding of illness, the medical care and treatment options available to you, and fears, hopes, and needs. So what does any of that mean? So let's talk about what each of those mean. Goals. So what are you hoping for from your medical treatment? If time is short, if your life expectancy is limited, what are you hoping for with the time that you have left? Is it to spend time with family? Is it traveling to visit someone important? Is it accomplishing some unfinished work? Is it about having a good quality of life? Those are goals. Values. So the way I think about values is what makes life worth living? What brings you joy and meaning and purpose to your day-to-day life? For you, is it all about family? Is it about maintaining your independence or your autonomy? Is it about being active? Beliefs. So that could be faith or religious or spiritual beliefs. What are your beliefs about your illness right now? What's your sense about the future? Understanding of illness. So what's the goal of your cancer treatment? How long do people generally live on average from this? Is that information that you want to know, or is that helpful information for you? And then medical care and treatment options. So is it important? It's important to know what treatment options exist and if they help you meet your goals or not. So for example, will getting a particular form of chemotherapy help me live longer or allow me a decent quality of life? Would getting CPR if my heart stopped allow me to live longer or return to an acceptable quality of life? And then fears, hopes, and needs. Those are fears, hopes, and needs now and in thinking about the future. So for some, that may be about concerns about getting sicker or depending on others, being a burden on their loved ones. Maybe you have death-related concerns, or how are your loved ones going to be after you're gone? So these are some things that may be worth reflecting on. Talking about the future, planning for the future can be a tough conversation or a series of conversations. These are tough things to talk about and think about. It takes courage, it takes bravery to think and plan ahead in that way. So talk to your medical providers who can weigh in on the type of cancer that you have, what to expect from treatment, and how it's going to impact your quality of life. Your oncologist might be the right person to talk to about this, or maybe your primary care physician. Many cancer centers and medical centers, hospitals have hospice and palliative care physicians, like myself, who specialize in having conversations like this. And I'd like to take the opportunity to clarify what palliative care and what hospice is about. So palliative care is for anyone with a serious illness. You can access it at any age and at any stage of a serious illness, at any age and at any stage of a serious illness. And it can be delivered alongside curative treatments. It's a service that's based on need, and it's not actually dependent on prognosis. So I take care of patients who are very early on in their treatment, who I expect are going to be cured. I also take care of patients with advanced cancers that may die in the upcoming weeks or months. No matter your age, no matter your stage, our goal is to lessen disease burden and to improve quality of life for both the patient and the family. So how do you access palliative care? Palliative care is covered through traditional medical insurance, just like seeing any other specialist. You can see a palliative care provider while you're hospitalized or as an outpatient, and very likely affiliated with a cancer center. In addition, there's some home-based palliative care programs where a provider actually comes to your home and delivers care to you. If you aren't seeing Pal Care and you're interested in doing so, talk to your primary care doctor or to your oncologist, who could refer you to the outpatient program or to the home-based palliative care program in your area. Now, how about hospice care? So hospice provides palliative care, focusing on symptom control and focusing on quality of life to patients who are nearing the end of their lives. So people who receive hospice are terminally ill. They're not receiving curative treatment. To enroll with hospice, patients generally have an expected prognosis of about 6 months or less if the disease runs its course. The way I think about hospice is it's a philosophy. It's a philosophy of medical care. It's about caring for the whole person with the goal of providing quality of life and comfort when time is short. Generally, people who receive hospice care are in their own homes, but it can also be delivered in a nursing home, in an assisted living facility, or in a dedicated inpatient hospice unit, depending on the person's needs. Now, unlike palliative care, where you just get a doctor or nurse practitioner taking care of you, in hospice, you get a whole team that includes a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a nurse, a social worker, chaplain, a home attendant, and generally fantastic counseling services, whether it be for mental health, child life services, as in for children, and bereavement. And bereavement means counseling for the family after the person dies. Hospice is an extra layer of support at a time when patients and families need it the most. Now, hospice care and all of its services, along with access to medications that come to your house and medical equipment, is a benefit that is 100% covered through medical insurance generally. Now, I want to change gears a little bit. Again, we've spent up to now talking about the importance of advanced care planning, how to actually start that conversation, and who to start that conversation with. But when's the right time to consider advanced care planning? When you're first diagnosed, or later when it seems like the cancer is progressing? Well, think about it this way. When you were getting ready to have a baby, you probably spent months preparing for his or her birth, reading books, educating yourself, ordering the supplies you needed, organizing your home to welcome the baby. In the same way that we prepare for something as major as birth, we should prepare for something as equally as important, dying. The best time to think about it, talk to family, and put your wishes on paper is earlier. If your doctors feel like this is a life-limiting illness, it's better you start advanced care planning earlier, but also when you're emotionally ready to do so, even if you're preparing for something that's months or a year away. Advanced care planning ultimately means that you're going to document your preferences so that we can ensure that your wishes are honored. So let's actually talk about some of the actual medical decisions and the documents that you may consider filling out to legalize your wishes. There is, unfortunately, no universal document yet. Each state has its own advanced directive form, so you need to actually obtain and fill out the legal documents that are in your state. Your doctor's office or your medical center in the hospital should have all of them. Additionally, you can Google that information online and print the documents that your state uses. Though the documents vary from state to state, the language is generally similar. And today, that's what I want to review with you. So today I'm going to review the role of the power of attorney for healthcare, the advanced directive and living will, DNR orders, and post and most forms. And if you have questions about any other documents or any other things you've heard about at the end, I'm happy to answer your questions on those as well. So the most basic and important document that everyone should fill out, regardless of their current health condition, is one where you elect people who can hear medical information about you and make decisions on your behalf in your best interest if you couldn't do that for yourself. This is called the power of attorney for healthcare, but it's also known as something different from state to state. And that could be, in some states, a healthcare proxy, in other states, a designation of healthcare surrogate form, or in others, a medical power of attorney. For the way I think about it is, for every new procedure or every new medical treatment, your consent is required. So you can give consent, you could refuse consent, or you could substitute a decision maker to speak on your behalf. Many people want to make decisions for themselves. However, if they become unwell or they lose the ability to make decisions for themselves, the doctors need to know who to talk to. So from a legal perspective, without this document, the doctors automatically speak to, number one, a legal guardian, if you have one. For most people, the first is the spouse. Next comes an adult child, followed by the patient's parents, followed by the patient's siblings, and so on and so forth. With this document, you actually choose who the doctors speak with. So to ensure that the right people are your proxy, this form allows you to pick two people who you want as your surrogate decision makers. This is particularly important in people with brain tumors or cancers because of the risk of cognitive decline. You could lose the ability to understand complex medical information, lose the ability to make complex decisions, weigh pros and cons, or communicate your preferences as a result of your illness. So to fill out this form, you have to be well enough to cognitively pick out surrogates. That's why this form should be filled out earlier rather than later. And you can see at the top, there's a space to put in the patient's information. And then there's a space to write in the primary healthcare agent, and if you choose, an alternate healthcare agent. Realistically, we know that many families make decisions together, and we respect that. This simply allows for a legal decision maker and a point person for communication. Now, at the bottom of this form, which has gotten cut off, there is a space for the patient to sign, and then there's a space for two witnesses to sign. The witnesses cannot be the healthcare surrogates. This form can be done at a doctor's office. It can be done with a lawyer, or you can simply print one out online and fill it out in the presence of other people who can witness it. since it doesn't actually need a physician signature. If you do that, you can find every state's form on a website that I shared on this last slide, eforms.com. And at the end of this, Ambreen is going to share with you all of these websites as well. So if you'd like, each state looks a little bit differently, but the language and the layout is basically the same. So don't be alarmed if you go into eForms or you go to your doctor's office and the forms look a little bit different from this one. Now let's talk about advanced directives and living wills. Those words are interchangeable. And as I said, this is a complexity of each state having different forms, different documents, and different things that they call those forms. So advanced directives are also unique from state to state. There is another website that I'll refer you to. It's called caringinfo.org. And once again, it's going to be on the last slide. And that has free downloadable advanced directives for each state with step-by-step instructions. It's a legal document, and in some states it can be witnessed, in others it has to be notarized. It does not have to be filled out with a lawyer, but law offices do offer this service as well. These forms are always available at your doctor's office, at any medical center, or in the hospital. And the general purpose of an advanced directive is to spell out the kind of care you would want to receive if you were terminally ill. So I recommend that no matter where you fill it out, you discuss it with your medical provider as well. So here is an example of how many states organize the advanced directive or living will statement. It's a document with a series of statements, as you can see, or short paragraphs. You should read each statement carefully and select which one or which ones fit your preference. And then you initial on the appropriate lines. In this state, there are 5 options. In other advanced directives, there may be only 1 or 3 options, depending on your state. In general, option 1 says that if you have a terminal condition, you would want care that supports comfort and protecting your quality of life. And you don't want to prolong the dying process with artificial or life-sustaining treatment. Option 2 generally says that you want all the medical care necessary until the point that the doctors feel like you're terminally ill or you're in an irreversible situation. And generally, option 3 says something like, regardless of my condition, please prolong my life to the greatest extent possible. You should choose whichever kind of care statement, whichever kind of intensity of care that resonates with you. So many states, in fact, simplify this and only give one option so that you can opt in or opt out of that option. And that is that you wouldn't want to be prolonged artificially or kept on life-sustaining treatment if you were terminally ill. So you can either sign or don't sign that statement depending on if it makes sense to you. Let's talk about DNR orders. So it stands for Do Not Resuscitate Order. Let me give a little bit of background on this topic. So when a person has a serious illness like cancer, they often die because of complications related to that illness. If the priority at the end of your life is to be as comfortable as possible when the time comes, then I recommend that we don't try artificial or heroic or aggressive measures to attempt to keep you alive. In other words, as you die, you'd like to be allowed to have a natural and a peaceful death. So people who are elderly, people who have serious illnesses like cancer, have a very low chance of surviving CPR or cardiopulmonary resuscitation. That's because resuscitation doesn't actually fix the underlying reason that they're dying. If you have advanced cancer, you're likely going to die of complications related to your cancer. And since CPR doesn't actually fix the cancer, it doesn't help you live longer. And for the small percentage of people who do survive after CPR, there's a low chance of returning to an acceptable quality of life. And for that reason, most people elect to be DNR as they approach the end of their lives. So if this general philosophy makes sense to you, I recommend that you sign a DNR order. You can find DNR forms at your doctor's office or at any medical center in the hospital. In many states, they're filled out on a bright piece of paper, and they're supposed to be kept in a visible place so that EMS or the paramedics can easily identify them in case of emergency. So the best place to keep it is usually on the refrigerator, or if the person's always in bed, in that person's bedroom. This document is a physician's medical order. So a physician's signature is required, and the patient, or alternatively the healthcare surrogate, must sign it as well. The last form that I want to talk about is the MOLST and the POLST. So depending on the state that you live in, they're either called MOLST or POLST forms, and they stand for Medical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment or Physician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. These are legal documents that are patient and physician signed medical orders. So people who are nearing the end of their life often receive unwanted or burdensome medical treatments that they may not want. And as they become sicker, they may not be able to voice their preferences in an emergency. So the MOLST and the POLST protects patients who have serious illnesses from receiving unwanted treatments at the end of their lives. This may not be relevant as a form for people who are otherwise healthy and able-bodied. The MOLST and the POLST, they're like a medical cliff notes. So they address a limited number of critical decisions that come up at the end of life. And you can see them kind of outlined here. Number one, CPR versus allowing for a DNR. Number two, intubation and being put on a ventilator versus a trial period of ventilation versus no intubation and ventilation at all. Dialysis, artificial nutrition like feeding tubes, IV fluids, IV antibiotics at the end of life. And in case of an emergency, would you want to be transferred to the hospital versus allowed to stay at home? So often people's medical preferences change with time, and they change as they become sicker. So this form may be more relevant later in the disease course. Now, we've spent up to now talking about healthcare preferences because that was a topic. But besides advanced care planning documents, there's other end-of-life care planning that can be helpful to discuss and document. So I just want to make sure I at least mention what those are. Often people wait too long to get these done. But if you wait too long, it gets to be harder, and especially if there are cognitive issues later. Lawyers are very limited in addressing your needs if you have cognitive issues when trying to plan for the future. So some things to consider completing are the financial power of attorney, and that's the document where you list the person who's kind of in charge of the finances, a last will and testament, and a trust if that's relevant. If you have young children, or if you're a single parent or a legal guardian, you also need to complete guardianship paperwork to ensure that your children are going to be cared for by the legal guardian of your choosing and not the court's choosing. So these first four things, the power of attorney, that's financial, the last will and testament, trust, and guardianship need to be done with a lawyer. Separately from that, you may also want to consider thinking about your funeral or your burial wishes. Many people also want to think about legacy leaving projects so that loved ones can remember them. So some things that people may work on are letters, videos, art, something to hold of their loved ones after they're gone. Those things can be challenging to think about and to talk about. It's also likely that you're going to experience enormous peace when you know that all of this is settled and done. Now, some takeaway points from this hour. My big takeaway from this hour is think about your goals. Think about what you value, your worries, your hopes for the future. A question that I feel gets to the heart of the matter is this. If your doctors told you that time was short, if they worry that you may just have a few months left to live, what's important with the time that you have left? Is it family? Is it your comfort? Is it being at home? Once you've thought about your goals, share those thoughts with your loved ones and with your medical providers. It will help them and it will help you. There are resources that I'm going to share on the next page to help you get your conversation started. The next step is to document your preferences. Everyone, no matter their age or their health status, should do a healthcare surrogate form so that medical providers know who they can talk to and who can speak for you in case of an emergency. Other documents you may consider based on your preferences are a living will or advance directive, a DNR order, and a mulched or a post form. And then finally, when you are in planning mode, you may want to also consider financial and legal planning with a lawyer. And once again, share your wishes with your loved ones and the medical team. None of this counts if nobody knows. I promise you that advanced care planning, though hard, can also be incredibly rewarding and likely will spark a rich, meaningful series of conversations for you, your family, and your friends. With that, I want to share some helpful websites and resources to help you start the conversation, to help you gain information on advanced care planning and end-of-life care planning, and give you some places where you can review these forms that we talked about. So the Conversation Project is a wonderful website which has printable worksheets or forms that you can download to talk about some of the things that I've discussed, your goals, your values, what your hopes, your fears are, how people remember you, the way you want to be honored. I also want to guide you towards the ABTA's End of Life Care web page, which is a wonderful synopsis of everything that we've talked about, and the ABTA Caregiver Handbook, which is a wonderful resource. Often caregivers are the ones taking the lead on this. And so this has some wonderful tips on how to approach it. There's ways to get in touch with support groups locally in your area, as well as through Zoom, social media, etc. And those are going to be shared with you at the end. And then in terms of forms, eforms.com has information, has each state's healthcare surrogate information, as well as DNR forms state by state. Caringinfo.org has state-by-state advanced directives and living wills. And then everplans.com is a really interesting website. There's a big part of it that's free. There's a piece of it that if you want, you could pay for. And everplans.com goes state by state about planning for the future. So if whatever state that you live in, you go into that section, it talks through the laws that govern financial planning, power of attorney, wills, trusts, etc. It shares with you links to the medical documents for advanced care planning. And it also goes through some things that I haven't discussed, like organ donation, if that's something you're interested in exploring. So it can take you to the organ donation website for your state to learn more. So that's another website that I think is worth checking out. With that, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak today. And I'd love to take your questions and your comments at this time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zapata. As a reminder, if you do have a question that you'd like to ask, please type and submit it using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we'll answer questions as time allows. So one of the first questions we have is related to having those difficult conversations with your loved ones. You've mentioned the importance of starting these conversations early, but do you have any tips or advice that you can share to our listeners now on just how to approach or introduce that topic to their loved ones? That can be very challenging and a hard topic to bring up.
That's a great question. That's a wonderful question. It's just as difficult as it is to talk about it as a family with your loved ones or with friends. I want you to know that your medical professionals find it equally difficult to talk about these things. And so often we don't have the opportunity to say the things that we feel. I think that a good way to introduce it is to share with your family that you're worried about things, or that you want to be able to prepare for the future and explain what that means, things that you're worried about. And for some people, it's more about the finances. For some, it's about the medical care. For others, it's about like being able to tell people how much they appreciate them and are you going to be okay? And I think that starting with sharing your own worries allows you to be able to get to be able to start that conversation. If it's been particularly challenging, another approach, and what often we do with patients and their family members, is somebody will say in the family, whether it's the person going with the illness or a family member, will say, we've had a really hard time talking about it. And your physician, your social worker, a trusted person in your life can help to initiate that conversation.
Thank you so much for that wonderful advice. We also have a couple of questions here asking about these forms that patients and their families are filling out and signing. Are they recognized in different states? If a patient filled one out, for example, in Illinois, but then they moved to Florida, is that still going to be recognized? Do they have to refile this form? How does that work?
So because not everyone knows the answer to that question, when I very commonly have patients who are moving from another state to another. These are state-by-state forms, and every state has their own laws that govern all the details of what we're talking about. And because every state's form is different, it really is kind of only honored in that state. So what we do is when we have people who have done these documents in another state, we just transfer it onto our states and upload it into the system. The legal document that you may fill out with your lawyer traverses across states. If it says state of Florida DNR, then we repeat.
Thank you so much. And on that same note, or kind of along the same lines, if a patient, we have some patients who are receiving treatments in other states where they don't live. So if they're wanting to complete these forms, are they to be completed in the state that they reside in or in the state that we're receiving their treatment in? How does
That's a great question as well. I would do both. And the reason is if a medical emergency is going to occur, it would be in one of those two places. If you have been so thoughtful about thinking about the things that you want, the only way to ensure that your wishes are honored by EMTs, by paramedics, by people who, by your physicians, by nurses, by everyone, is to make sure that you have the state-specific document.
Thank you for sharing that. And again, just staying on the topic of these legal documents, is there a cost to filing these legal documents, such as power of attorney, your last will and testament? And if there is that something that's covered by insurance?
So it depends who's doing it. So the legal documents like the last will and testament, trusts, the financial power of attorney, guardianship, you're doing that with a lawyer, and the lawyer is going to have their fees to doing it. There are pro bono lawyers, and depending on the health system that you're affiliated with, there may be more or less access to some of these things. It's something that's worth talking to the social worker about, who would be in touch with how you can get free services in your region. Because there are ways to do it. Because for many people, these documents are cost prohibitive to do with a lawyer. The medical documents are all absolutely free.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that insight. And do you mind spending a little time just clarifying once again, what is the role of the healthcare proxy? Is that individual just there to kind of speak on the wishes that the patient has already written down in their advanced directives and advanced care planning, or are they able to make decisions that the patient might not have already outlined on behalf of the patient in their best interest as well?
Yeah, it's complicated, the answer to that question. So as long as the person has capacity to make their own decisions and they want to make decisions for themselves, those are the wishes that are honored, whatever comes out of the patient's mouth. Those are the wishes that are honored. At whatever point that that person cannot make decisions for themselves, because they have lost capacity to do so, they don't want to do so, they're cognitively not there to do so, whatever it may be, the healthcare surrogate becomes the person who can hear all medical information and make decisions on their behalf in their best interest. The decisions that are made, so whatever the healthcare surrogate says is effectively what goes. When you choose your healthcare surrogate, that's the person who you've decided is going to act in your best interest. And so your healthcare surrogate is supposed to, in acting in your best interest, is the wishes that are the doctors are going to honor. They could supersede some of the wishes that you have on paper, though not physician orders like a MOST or POST form, because that's a physician signed order.
Thank you so much for clarifying that. Another question we have here is kind of going back to just how difficult it can be to bring up end of life, especially when the patient might be, doing fairly well. They might have a very positive attitude, and physically they're doing fine, but they do have a life-limiting disease. Can you share any advice on how a caregiver or a loved one should bring up that topic? Should they bring up end of life? Is it possible that that might bring down the patient's attitude, or how can it be done in a way that is positive and is kind of preserving that positive attitude that the patient has?
Yeah, balancing hope with reality is a very difficult thing. I think that we have the tendency to think that if we say something, if we talk about end of life, or if we bring it up, that means it's going to happen. That's not necessarily what it is. That it gives us a chance to talk about those things. And I think that acknowledging that you have cancer, and that having cancer, no matter what it is or what the doctors have shared for you, is like a big scary word, and that's something that's been on your mind, because you were given that diagnosis. And so talking about best and worst case scenarios is maybe a good way to approach it. I'm not hoping that the worst case scenario will occur. I'm hoping for the best. I just want to be able to also plan and talk about what happens if we don't get to the best.
Thank you so much. And I know you mentioned this earlier in the talk, but do you mind sharing again? Does Medicare cover both palliative care and hospice?
Absolutely. So palliative care is covered by generally all insurances. The thing that periodically will come up is, depending on the kind of insurance that you have, you may need a referral. Like you go to the dermatologist or you go to the eye doctor and you need your primary care doctor to write a referral. That can come up with some insurances that you need a referral and it needs to be done in X amount of time. But in general, yes, Medicare, that's more of an issue with private insurances. In general, Medicare absolutely covers palliative care. Hospice, So if you look at your check stub, your whole life that you've been working, you've been paying into Medicare. And that paying into Medicare is what helps pay for hospice care later. It's something you worked hard your whole life and that you deserve when the time is right. That's why hospice is 100% covered. So you may, depending on when in the year it is, you may have to reach a deductible or meet your deductible or something like that. But beyond that, it's 100% covered.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, earlier in your talk, you had mentioned that hospice can be provided in a variety of ways, at home or inpatient, for example. Do patients and families have the ability to choose how they want to receive hospice? And if they do have that choice, are there any pros and cons of doing it at home versus inpatient or another way?
It's a good question. So yes, you have some choice. The majority of people want their care to be delivered at home with the support in their house to be able to live well at home. That's how most people do it, and hospice is generally going to honor that. In the same way that your home may be your home or your apartment, for many people, a nursing home or an assisted living is your home. And so it can also be taken care of in those kinds of locations because that's your residence. An inpatient palliative care unit, so that's kind of like a high intensity level of care place, which provides hospice care. It's like an ICU that looks like a Ritz-Carlton, generally, is my way of explaining it to people. And it's very family and patient and caregiver oriented. So the sky's the limit to some degree in those kinds of facilities. That's the only place where you can't just go because you feel like it. You need to qualify by Medicare standards to be in a place like that. And it really means you need to meet the intensity of care that's needed to be in an inpatient hospice. For everything else, yes, it's your choice to be able to be at home or in the place that you reside and get that care.
Thank you for sharing that insight. And if anyone wanted to look up those requirements for having access to that more intensive level of care inpatient, where would they be able to find that?
Sorry, you cut off for just a moment. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, sure. So if anyone wanted to look up where or look up the requirements for that intensive inpatient level of hospice care to see if they qualify, where would they be able to find that information?
So if you happen to already be enrolled with hospice, you could chat with them about that because they're the ones who are going to be deeming. In general, you could literally put in what you said into Google and it will tell you the requirements. Medicare has been a little bit strict about that over the years. And so in general, what qualifies a person to be inpatient is that if they need basically continuous or close to continuous care from specialized services like nursing services, physician oversight, et cetera, needing IV support for medication. It's possible to do IV at home, and that's why a lot of things are possible at home hospice. But for some people, certain IV therapies or symptoms that can't be controlled easily at home are better managed in inpatient unit. And those are generally the reasons that one would be there.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Let's see. So another question we have is, once a patient and their family completes these advanced care directives and forms, if the patient's still of sound mind and is able to make those decisions, if they change their mind on any of the decisions that they've already made, are they able to make updates to that form?
Absolutely. The last form gets voided. So whenever you complete a form, I'll say this, a lot of people's care preferences change with time because as your health status changes with time, as you age, as your expectations, as all these things change, so do your advanced care planning preferences. And so commonly we make changes to those. The original copy of all these documents are yours. Those are your legal documents. So at any time that they're no longer relevant, you let your doctors know. The forms that are already uploaded into the electronic medical record or the forms that are already on file are voided. And a new document is made in place and uploaded. And that's the most recent document is the one that supersedes everything else.
Thank you so much. I think we'll take one more question. So, this whole time we've kind of been talking mostly about patients that have been told that their disease is life-limiting. They've been given a terminal diagnosis. There are some brain tumor patients that may be living with their brain tumor. They might not have been told just yet that it's terminal. Is advanced care planning something that they should also be thinking about or maybe talking about with their family, or is that something that you feel like is more reserved for those who are in that life-limiting phase of disease?
I think that it's this is my passion and this is what I do. So my preference for people is to be able to have those conversations and put them away. If it's not relevant in this part of your life, at least you've equipped your loved ones, your family with what your thoughts are, because your thoughts are only your own unless you share it with somebody else. Certainly doing a healthcare surrogate is worth doing as soon as you become an adult. And I recommend that for everybody, no matter what their healthcare status is. I would say that other conversations, if you're emotionally ready to have that conversation, then it's worth sharing some of your thoughts with your family or loved ones because it guides them in case something changes. And if you don't need it, you've addressed it and you can move along.
Thank you so much. And we have a few more minutes and we have an additional question that I think would be important to mention. So we've been talking about, the surrogate, the healthcare proxy. Do you have tips on how a patient can pick who the right person is to be that healthcare proxy for them? And second part to the question would be for someone who doesn't have a strong support system or loved ones that are there to help, what can they do in that case if they don't really have someone that they feel like is close enough that they would assign that role to?
That's a fantastic question. So the way to know who the right healthcare surrogate for you is to be able to have these kinds of conversations with your loved ones and gauge where people are at. The person who says, I want to understand and honor and respect your wishes. You tell me what you want and I'm going to help you get there. Or I see where you're coming from. The people who have a deep understanding for where you're coming from and understand that the reason that they're being chosen is not to pick what's in their heart, but to pick what's in your heart, what you would do for yourself. That's a person to choose. Now, many people don't have that in their life, and it's because of a variety of reasons, or there's not the right person who could make decisions on their behalf. It's a very common issue that we encounter. And that's okay. What it means is being able to sit down with a medical professional who can talk to you about your goals, your values, your expectations of the future, to understand where you're at, to go through many of these medical and other topics to discuss what things are acceptable or not acceptable to you, and to write them all out and to do these documents, because these documents are what will allow you to have your wishes honored and your body honored. So it really then becomes relying on the rest of the documents.
Thank you so much for your insight. That is all the time that we have for questions for today. I want to thank you again, Dr. Zapata, for your wonderful presentation and taking the time to answer these fantastic questions.
Thank you so much. It's truly been an honor and a privilege. Thank you so much.
All right, well, aside from our educational webinar series, the ABTA has a variety of programs that help support patients and caregivers throughout their experience. For more information about ABTA's programs, events, and services, please visit ABTA's website at abta.org, email us at info@abta.org or call the ABTA Care Line at 1-800-886-2282.